Hi, it's Jen from Shabby Fabrics. Welcome back to week 2 of our North Pole Sampler Sew Along. In our first week we did our tree blocks, and this time we'll be making 8 wreath blocks. 4 will have the light green in the upper left corner, and 4 will have the darker green in the upper left corner, but of course the process is the same to make each of the wreath blocks, and then we'll be sewing 4 of those together with some sashing strips and creating a unit. So this is what the individual block will look like, and then once you sew 4 of those, we'll be using some sashing strips to sew that together into a unit, and you'll be making 2 of these. So of course, just like I mentioned in our first video, which was quite long, and don't worry, these are all going to be much shorter except till the very end when we put everything together. Same thing, good pressing habits, using plenty of sizing, pressing everything out, cutting all your fabrics, and labeling helps you to stay organized, and you can jump right into that. If you've already cut everything out, you're just pulling pieces out. You're opening that bag that's labeled as wreath, and here we go. So we're going to make the top portion of our wreath block first, and our instructions are telling us that we'll be using 1 piece of the red and 1 piece of the white. We have 2 different reds in this particular quilt. One has the kind of snow dot, the white dot on the red background, and we have the snowflake. So we have already made the one that has the little polka dot. So I'm going to do the one with the snowflake today, and a piece of white fabric. So our instructions are guiding us to draw a line and to sew on either side of that. So that's something we probably all learned, and I'm going to show you how we do that, and then also show you a new tool to give you an option if you prefer to use the tool. And I always love to bring tools to you that I truly feel bring you value, accuracy, fun, and precision. So it's just something I want to be able to present to you, because it's nice to know when new notions come out that maybe you're like, oh, if I'd only known that notion was available, I would be using that. So here's how we were taught, or maybe if you have never done these before, the traditional way to make what's called half square triangles is to draw the line corner to corner like this. Go right sides together. So of course on the white it's difficult to say, you know, what's the right side, but let's say this was a print. You would have the printed side, so it'd be the right sides together. And just like we're showing you in the pattern here, the dashed lines representing what we would be doing for sewing. We would take that to our machine and sew on either side of that using this line as our reference to sew a 1/4 inch away. That's how we were taught. It works well, but there's a new tool out there. I'm going to erase that line with the heat. That's what I love about a friction pen. And that's why you're going to want plenty of these in your sewing room, especially if you're drawing any hand embroidery on something. It's nice to be able to remove the lines, especially after the embroidering is done. There's a tool on the market. It's called the Fons and Porter. It's specifically made for the making half square triangles. There's 2 sizes in there. There's 2 sizes in this little unit when you purchase it. And what I love about that, we'll use the smaller one because we don't need to be using that bigger one, but you can see if you're making big half square triangle units, think of how big this will actually make. So you've got all kinds of size potentials. So your yellow line is really going to go corner to corner, and I don't even need to really have that lined up with my red. I only need to be marking on whatever fabric I'm going to have on top. What I love about that is once I have that in the corner here and the corner here, is I will use my friction pen, and I'm just going to spin that around, because it's, you know, I can certainly do that, but that is a little bit on the awkward side. Just spin it around real quick, and let's line that up again, and let's just draw. Here's what I know about sewing. When I have to visually go try to achieve a 1/4 inch seam allowance, I usually get it pretty close, but I'm much more accurate when I get to sew on a line because I'm focused on the line. So that I find that when I use this tool and I'm sewing on the line to make half square triangles, my half square triangles consistently come out more accurate. So that's just been my experience, and I wanted to introduce you to the potential of using the tool, because you too may find it's just a little bit more enjoyable, more fun, and it's a little more relaxing when I know I only have to sew directly on my line. Be sure to stack your fabrics one right on top of the other. Let's head over to the sewing machine. Now, one thing I'm going to be introducing you today is something called a starter strip. This is just a scrap piece of fabric. There's nothing special about it, but knowing that I'm going to be dealing with a lot of triangles and a lot of things happening, it just kind of helps the machine kind of get going, and I can follow right up. I'm going to get in real close, and I'm going to follow right up, and I'm just sewing on my line right now. I'll turn it around and come right back down this side. You can cut your thread if you're not comfortable making that pivot, that's fine. Okay, so let's trim off that starter strip. The starter strip is helpful because sometimes, especially when you're sewing sharp points together, like you cut this apart, which we're about to do. Let's just go do that, and I'll be able to emphasize the point of a starter strip. I'm just going to put this corner to corner. But later on, you start getting these little points here. And it's sometimes, as I'm sewing, they kind of dive into the feed dog of my sewing machine. A starter strip seems to help alleviate that. If you've never used one, maybe just give it a try. Again, it's just a scrap piece of fabric, and you can decide whether you like using those or not. So we're going to give a press, and our instructions will say, press toward the red. Okay, so what that means to me is I'm just going to flip that over, and let's press toward the red. This is the top portion of our wreath. It's the bow. Now what you'll notice when you have half square triangles is you're going to have what's called little dog ears. Where they came up with that, I don't know, but that's what they call them. And I just trim those away. The last thing that you want is to have additional bulk in your seams. You just don't need that, and certainly don't want that. So go ahead and just trim those away. Now at this point, as you can see, we're going to refer to our diagram. You're like, how does this go together? That's why I always love to have not only obviously the instructions in front of me, but also where am I going with this? What's this going to look like? So you just want to lay those out so your sight picture looks just like what you've got going on here. And let's just go right sides together with that. Now I've got a choice here. I can start here and I can finish there, or I can flip this over and I can start here and finish there. That's really your preference. I think I'll start where I kind of have that bulk right there, and I'm going to pin that. You saw in my first video, I kind of got a little lazy with my pinning, and I ended up paying for that with doing a little bit of seam ripping on camera, because that sometimes happens. Fabric just tends to move around, slip around just a touch, and well, next thing you know, your seams are off and you're seam ripping. So let's start off with our starter strip again. We'll use that today throughout our process of sewing our block together. All right, so let's see. We want to continually refer to our instructions to decide and determine if it's important to press our seams one direction or the other, or sometimes even open. So as you can see on the back of this, we have a lot of layers happening. If I press that here, I literally have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 layers. and same here. So for that reason, kind of distributing that evenly with an open seam is the most logical decision. And we do mention that in the instructions. So again, if you are new to sewing, this emphasis on where seams are pressed is important. It does help your blocks lay flatter. I'm going to show you the back of how this was pressed, and we'll be following suit today so that the block lays as evenly as possible and you don't have to have these ridges and these valleys of for the blocks. I'll just leave that turned over so we can keep referring to that. So I'll press that open to distribute that bulk. And I said before that'd be 8 layers. I think that's wrong. That would have been 6 layers. 1, 2, 3, actually 5. But now we have equal distribution of bulk. So this is where we are so far. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the bottom portion of this. Now I want you to note something. I mentioned it just a little briefly when I first introduced the block. Notice how light green, these 2 blocks have the light green in the upper quadrant, and these 2 blocks have the dark green. So when you lay out your pieces, don't get too ahead of yourself. Just make sure everything's laid out so you have that same orientation. We have done the bottom portion. So this is the first one for up here. The bottom portion is the one we'll be making together, and these 2 will be identical, okay? So this one will be coming up in this corner here. So this is the one we're going to be making together, this one right here. So with that in mind, you put that aside. This is the one that I will be looking at. Now I want to point out something to you again about pressing seams, but I think we'll get started and it'll be a little bit more intuitive once I get going. We want to have what's called interlocking seams. I can actually show you in this block. It's easier to sometimes focus on it when the block is whole. You will notice that on the light green, we pressed our seams toward the green. Our white, see that where that seam is? They're pressed toward the light green. On the dark green, they're pressed away. What that does for us is give us an interlocking seam when we sew those together. Let's make the block together and we'll be able to emphasize that in real time as we're making the block. And again, we're going to be doing this one. So we have our piece E, and out comes a piece D. And our instructions are showing us to, again, we're going to put that piece up here, and just like we did in our tree block, you can just take a ruler and draw a line and sew directly on that line, right? Once you're sure it's where it is, you're going to press to the outside, make sure you love it, trim away the excess. Repeat the same down in the bottom corner. Putting a second piece down there. Remember, this would be pressed away. Draw a line, sew on the line, press away, make sure you love it, trim it away. I'm going to be using the corner clipper because I think it makes my blocks more accurate. I just love what it does. So let's go ahead and bring out the corner clipper right now. And we'll start up in this corner here. Just like our pattern is telling us. We're going to follow this little example right here. So I've decided, you know what? I don't want to draw the line. I'm going to go ahead and use my corner clipper. So looking at where this would happen, this is our 2.5 inch line. And you see this dash line, right? That's where you would have normally drawn that line. You don't need to do that. The corner clipper is going to take care of that for you. We're going to go ahead, instead of drawing that line, we're going to just trim that fabric away. And I'm going to pin that real quick because I don't want that going anywhere. If you're feeling confident and you want to go ahead and put that other one down now to maximize your time at the sewing machine, again, understanding, okay, where does this line need to happen? Well, we know that this line, that solid line, is the line that you would have drawn with your ruler. When that line goes from that corner to that corner, and you're sewing on this side, you know you're on the proper side. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to prepare that, and I'm going to pin it. And I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew on one side and then come back up the other. Let's go do that now. Okay, so before I make all of my blocks, remember how I said we're going to make 8 blocks? And you saw in the first video how we started doing some economy sewing, right? We would get all of our corner clippers trimmed, pin, 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 make a trip to the sewing machine. Before you get too crazy, I always encourage you, do one block, make sure it's going together the way you think it is. The block is measuring the way it's supposed to be, and then you can think about some economical and time-saving approaches to how you can be doing multiple steps without compromising, accuracy. So I definitely have learned that it's always good to complete a block all the way through before you start doing a whole bunch of block trimming, especially with the corner clipper, because you need to make sure it's right. Now remember how I said that on the dark green, we were pressing toward the white. So let's look at our block again. Let's just double check. We're pressing toward the white. Once we do this step again with the light green, we will be pressing toward the light green. But for now, we know we are going to go ahead and press to the outside. So let's do that. And you see how beautiful that corner clipper is? Just, I love it. It saves me time, increases my accuracy. Okay, so we know we're going to do another one with the green. So I'm going to continue this process, getting these ready to go with my other dark green and my light green. I'm going to be sewing those. Okay, we have our units with their corners on, remembering that with the dark green, right, we're going to press to the outside toward the white, and with the light green, we'll be pressing toward the light green. So let's move that out of the way, and let's get that going. To the outside, out, there's that, and now here, how I do it is I kind of flip it over, kind of just finger pressing. This is when you're more likely to take a tuck. So you kind of almost need to press it from this side too, so you don't get just a little bit of a tuck. We kind of had that happen in the first block. And you've got bias here, right? It's on the angle, so I don't do too much of this, but I do want to make sure I get it flat, and I don't recommend steam at this point. Okay, so there's that one. And one more. Again, let's warm up those seams. They're just a little more compliant when they're warm. And we'll press from the front side, making sure everything is nice and flat. Note we didn't take any tucks in the seams. And this is when I like to refer back to my pattern and make sure that I lay everything out properly. So this is what I've got going on here, and this is really when I'll move everything over and start using my pressing mat really as a design board too, because now it's really helpful to me. I needed the spinning mat before, so I kind of kept this out of the way. I'm going to lay everything out before I do my final assembly and make sure I don't want to make any adjustments. Is everything as it appears? Well, I can already see right now I'm missing some pieces out here, right? So let's get that. Yep, there they are. Let's put that here. And I have a feeling she has a very specific pressing instructions that we can read all about here. And we can also just refer to our block and see what they did. It looks like, and this is logical, right? You can see there's a lot of bulk in there, so naturally you're going to want to press away from that. I'll show you what I mean when we talked a little bit about this in the first video, how usually a block is going to really tell you what it wants to do as far as pressing goes. Now I am going to go ahead and pin both of those and sew on each side just to save us a little bit of time. So let's go sew that together. You know what? While I'm at it, I'm going to sew these together too, because we're going to make our trips to the sewing machine count. This is where pressing the seams in the opposite direction helps. See how this seam goes here and that goes here, and they just nest beautifully. This is what makes a quilt block lay flat. All the seams come together the way you want them to. Pin the beginning, pin the end. And really, this is very important that that comes together just where it's supposed to. And boy, they just kind of lock in like a puzzle piece, and I'll put my pin right along that. Okay, so that's going to go to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew down that direction. Same here. Oh, I love how that clicks together. Put a pin here, down there, and right along here. We're just going to visually check. If you're uncertain, you can put a pin in, kind of take a peek, insert it into the fabric beneath it, also in the seam, and kind of rock those up so that they're really just locked in. All right. So let's go ahead and take all of this to the sewing machine and let's get started. Okay, again, we're doing some chain stitching, save some thread, save some time. And we'll just trim off our starter strip and separate our pieces. And I like to lay out again, make sure, did I actually sew that together properly? Gosh, I've sewn together plenty of blocks in the wrong direction. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I think we've all done it. Now keep in mind, that block's in the upper corner, so we're not mimicking that. It's this block right here. This is the block that we're mimicking and trying to make again. So let's just double check that that's what we have. Yes, and yes, right? So that looks like this. Now let's look at that block again. Notice now how here you've got a lot of bulk. Obviously we're going to press to the outside here. And as we did here, again, there's no advantage, it's actually a disadvantage to press this direction or this direction because now you have lopsided bulk. So we'll be pressing those seams open. So let's press accordingly. Away from the bulk. Away and away. And then here, we're going to go open with that. Sometimes just getting it open. And if you kind of wiggle the point of your iron, it kind of helps open the seam. That's something I guess I've learned along the way. And I like to press on from both sides. Again, making sure to not take a tuck. Warm it up. Then let's try to get in there. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Types to open it up. Press. And again here. All right, so as you would suspect, we're going to sew, rather than sewing this to here now, I'm going to work on just getting this put together beautifully because we really need those points to come together beautifully. When that's the case, I don't pin on either end first, I pin here first because this must happen. And I'm going to pin right along that seam, coming right up. Sometimes I'll also just pin a little bit more just to support so nothing shifts along the way. And then I'll go over in those corners. And I'm going to press. Not press, but pin rather. But pressing on the brain. Let's go sew that seam right now. Okay, let's see how we did. The goal, of course, is to have that seam line up exactly where we want it to. If it doesn't, we'll seam rip and do it again, right? I showed you that in the first video where my fabric was off. I seam ripped it, pinned it, sewed it, and it was exactly where it should have been. So it looks like that is good. I'm happy with that. Let's press that. Again, seam open seems to be the thing to do. So let's look at our block. Okay, I'm very happy with that. And now comes the top portion. Same thing. We're going to repeat those steps where we're going to pin through this down into this. You can rock that pin back up through the seam and back up this seam. Let's pin over here real quick. Having good pins, now that you understand pinning's important. Pinning's really important. Things can go awry when you don't pin. Invest in some good pins. These are the Clover patchwork pins, and I can't say enough about them. Super sharp, durable, and a glass head, so they're not going to melt if you accidentally touch it with your iron. Okay, let's see how we did with sewing on the top portion. Okay, I'm happy with that. These things are lining up here, they line up here. Good. Let's warm up that seam allowance. Let's look back here. There's a lot of bulk going on. So again, that seam, you know, where do we want to press it? There's just a lot going on in both directions, so we opted to go ahead and press open on this one. And our block is complete. Our block should now measure 8.5 by 10.5. And as I mentioned, you know, 4 of one and 4 of another, and you have sashing strips. The pieces that connect the blocks together are called sashing strips. So let me take this over here. So you've got 2 shorter sashing strips and 1 longer. So you've done that unit for the upper portion, and we're going to make that again. So let me just put that over here. And just to save time, we did go ahead and put the bottom portion together where we just sewed a sashing strip, and we can do that right now. So let's look at what we have. We've done the bottom portion. We know we need the light green in that corner and this one here. So the sashing strip will go in between here. So make sure your sashing strip is the same size of your block. If the sashing strip is longer than your block, that means your block's just a little bit shorter than it should be. Press it. You can usually make your block grow maybe 1/8 of an inch by just pressing it a little bit flatter. Once you're satisfied with that, go ahead and pin it. Again, pin in the beginning and pin in the end. It's very important that your units come out the right size because this quilt really blocks together as a puzzle. Each section needs to be its designated size in order for it to fit in with the rest of the quilt. So let's take this to our sewing machine. Let me grab my starter strip and let's sew that. I think I mentioned it already, but we're going to go ahead and press toward the white, and you'll see momentarily why is that. There's so much bulk going on over on this side that, watch as I kind of turn it to the back, you can see it's asking to please press in this direction. Press away from all of that bulk and kind of activity, I guess I would call it, the bulk of the block. So we are going to agree that that is a good idea. And now we'll just be lining up our other block, right? Looks correct, right sides together. And we're going to do the same thing. Pinning beginning and end, a couple in between, sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's one of the other cool things about this pin caddy. You probably hear that little click. It's magnetic, right? So if I have pins all over, all I do is just kind of, and it lines them up, which I love. So, and there's a little place to scoop up and get your pins. I just love the inventions that really have made quilting, you know, more fun. You're not losing your pins if you do knock them off your table. Well, first off, they're not going anywhere. If you put your pins back on the magnetic pin caddy, they can't fall off. So it's just safer that way. I have definitely stepped on a pin and that was not fun at all. So I religiously use my pin caddy and really keeps things safer. And my pins all together in one location. So that's how we're going to do our sashing. You did that for the bottom portion as well. And as you can see, now comes the upper portion. As you can imagine, you want this part, these two pieces, to have this uninterrupted visual line. So keep that in mind right there, that this is up here, but you kind of want to mentally have an uninterrupted visual line. And if I line up my edges right here and my here, then thank goodness it's all going to just line up anyway. So I can see if I'm going to pin here and pin here, that this will be where I want it to be. So just like we've been doing, we're going to pin the beginning, we're going to pin the end, and my attention right now is going to see, is that lining up? Do you see that right there? Let me get my head out of the way. See how those are lined up? I'm going to lay that down right there, and I'm going to put 2 pins, one on either side of that, because I don't want that to move, because I want that to visually line up. We'll put a pin in here and one down there. Maybe I'll put 2 in there. You really almost can't pin too much. I'm sure someone out there is saying, yes, you can. Well, that's probably true, but the idea being, you'll only regret if you underpin. That's when the regret comes in, and seam ripping. Okay, let's go sew that final sashing strip on, and our block unit will be done. Let's see how we did. So we'll bring our pressing mat. Our iron is good and hot. Let's get these. This block unit's gotten big. Let's move that over here. Let's see how we did. I like it. Things are lined up where they need to be. This is stacked on top of this. These are right above our points. This is what we're kind of checking as we go. Let's warm up that final seam, and as you can see, the bulk is obviously on this side of the block unit with nothing on this side. So we're going to press toward that white long sashing strip, and our block unit is done. So fun. I hope you guys are having a good time. I'm having a blast just teaching you stuff. As funny things come along, this is reality quilting, right? I'm just going to show you what happens in my sewing room. I'm sure it happens in your sewing room from time to time. And so I hope you're enjoying that. Join the conversation, leave a comment, jump into social media on Facebook, of course. And there we have our 2 wreath units. So already we're making great progress. I'll see you back for week 3 when we work on our gift blocks.